I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's town board work session. I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's town board work session of Monday, September 16th, 2024. We're going to begin with a pledge of allegiance, if you would please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have two presentations this afternoon. The first is a presentation of the executive summary following the Main Street corridor study. Amy Groves from Dover Cole and Sarah Carroll from Creighton Manning are here to present with the planning department on the findings. This is the first time they will have presented those to the town board. This is obviously, his work session is recorded. We will make this available with the rest of the findings so that people can review them. But more importantly, there'll be some comment period that Dan will talk about in a minute. Second, we're lucky enough to this afternoon to have an opportunity to have both our financial advisor and bond counsel with us. I thought it would be important for the board to be able to ask some general questions and get a general overview of bond and debt from our finance department and our comptroller's office while you're in receipt of this year's CIP and special districts budgets, which should have all posted today. And so I'm going to do that. It's not listed on the work session. It will be recorded, but we'll also take the presentation component and wrap it into the CIP presentation that I'll do in a couple weeks. So this is a question opportunity for our town board to ask some questions and get some information. So with that said, then after that, we do have an executive session to discuss potential land donation and then an update on our CSEA negotiations. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan Howard, our planning director. And Dan, please take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon. We'll be very short because I've got two experts with me who are far better equipped to talk about this than I am. But just as a little bit of background, the study kicked off last November. We had a charrette last January, an open charrette at Damon University with several folks. Again, Amy and Sarah will discuss the details of that. We've been going back and forth, refining the report. The draft report was posted to the town website in late August, and we expect that we'll leave it there for the duration of the time we need to take in the comments that we expect to have. So the report is on the website, as Brian mentioned. We hope this will be on the website and available. We'll provide a link to the presentation on the Main Street project page itself. So I'm happy to introduce Amy Groves from Dover Cole Associates and Sarah Carroll from Creighton Manning, who worked on the transportation planning piece of this.
Hi, good afternoon. Amy Groves with Dover Cole and Partners, and got some font problems. Hopefully that doesn't keep happening. All right, so we started this project, as Dan mentioned. Don't try to read the text at the bottom of the slide. There was the result of a project charter that you all had approved last year, and the project runs from Bailey Avenue through the 290. And so basically through the towns of Eggertsville and Snyder. And the goals and opportunities where they were part of that charter, you can see outlined here on this slide. A lot to do with increasing the amenities for pedestrians and cyclists, looking at traffic calming measures, as well as addressing speed, which is an important safety consideration when thinking about increasing the ability to walk and bike along the corridor. Also wanting to look at signage, beautification, and parking as the key goals. So we'll go ahead now and look at the existing conditions. We started looking at the historic photos of the corridor, and so you can see this image here from the early 1900s. This was an important street connecting to the city of Buffalo, and it was a wide corridor because it was a streetcar corridor, and so it was many historic neighborhoods connected back into the city of Buffalo, and you can still see that there today. A lot of these great historic homes and historic markers along the corridor still exist today. And so, we were looking at this history, and you can see, at the centers in Snyder and Eggertsville where buildings pulled up to the street, and the parking was located behind them, even back to the earliest of times. And so, that is something that would, lead us to look at different designs. I have a question. Our presentation is pretty graphic, but I'm noticing that most of the text I didn't know was going to not come through. Would you all want us to take a minute to switch to the PDF and click through that instead? Or is this?
Yeah, it is broadcast on YouTube, so I think it'd probably be beneficial to take a minute and switch.
Okay. Yeah. Is that possible? I know that we included the PDF. I have a flash drive. Sure.
I know you're giving away some secret algorithm here. Shocked that our accounts of PowerPoint fonts aren't something.
I don't think it's a funny font either. I'm really surprised. I think it's like Arial.
Shocked.
Hopefully the PDF will be better. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. We're just going to take a minute to reload that. You're fine.
The Amherst Main Street final presentation.
I'm more interested in the Fort Myers, coastal Florida.
I can give you that one later. Yeah, you may want to try the PDF. The PowerPoint might have the same issue as.
Well, that looked like he was running off of the PDF. So I'm wondering if it was our Acrobat that was misreading it. There you go.
Okay. Okay. Now, will I be able to advance, or will you have to click through it? Ah, perfect. Okay. I'm glad we took a minute. Thank you. So apologies for that. Now y'all can actually read the text. So as I mentioned, this was the study area. I'm going to just go get to where we were. Okay. So, we looked back at, all of the history of planning that's been done for this area, and including the action plans that were done in the early 2000s, looking at the comp plan, building upon all of this past work and thinking about the plan for the corridor. An important study we looked at was the regional transportation pedestrian bike plan, like Buffalo, Niagara. And so, this corridor is set as what they call a tier 2 bike route. So that's important from Bailey all the way to Harlem Road. And so, something that we're thinking about, helping to implement that idea, improving the bicycle conditions on the corridor. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now to walk through more of the existing conditions analysis.
This here. Thank you, everyone. So we took a first look at the traffic analysis of the traffic conditions of the corridor. Again, from Main Street, from Bailey Avenue to Kensington Avenue. We set out and did turning movement counts, ATRs, so setting tubes out to collect speed and vehicle classification and volume data, and as well as pedestrian and bicycle counts. And we did that in December of 2023. I'd like to point out as well that Main Street is New York State DOT road. It is classified as a principal urban arterial, and it is on the national highway system. So just something to keep in mind as we think about certain design criteria that's set by DOT, things like travel lane widths and shoulder widths, bike accommodations, all those things will come into play later on. We collected that data at 3 different locations for the ATRs. We determined that the total number of vehicles traveling on the corridor in one day averages anywhere from 17,600 vehicles to 22,500 vehicles. So it's good data to just kind of keep in mind for thinking about future recommendations, things like a road diet. Are we capable of doing that with the given roadway infrastructure? We also noted the speed limit at 3 different locations, the 85th percentile speed, so the speed at which 85% or more of people are traveling was 44 miles per hour. So again, something to keep in mind as we're thinking about this road being posted at 40 miles per hour and there being multiple school zones throughout the corridor. Again, we collected pedestrian and bicycle data and determined that the busiest pedestrian locations were at the intersections with Campus Drive, Harlem, and Chateau. And we did not know any existing bicycle infrastructure, and bike counts were pretty low. That could be attributed to the fact that we collected the data in December of 2023, but just something to point out kind of here is the pedestrian and bicycle counts. We also collected parking inventory on 2 different days. We collected midday weekday data and then evening weeknight data. And this graphic shows the overall restrictions along the corridor, where parking is allowed, where it isn't, where it's has restrictions for how long it could be there. And then we do have a summary in our executive summary about how many vehicles actually occupy those spaces. And I think you might be surprised to see it's pretty low overall, the given number of spaces available compared to how many spaces were actually occupied during the day and during the evening. We also collected existing signage data, so we went through and inventoried every single sign out in the corridor. My understanding is that some of these have changed since then, but we noted regulatory, warning, guide, and other sign. Some of those are required, things like speed limit signs or no parking signs, but other signs that might more guide you, like where a library is or kind of a welcome sign. So we noted all of that because we're keeping in mind part of the corridor plan is sign clutter and what we can do about that. We looked at the existing transit facilities. So NFTA has 2 corridors that run this corridor. We were able to get data from them on their on and off averages per day. So which stops are utilized more than others. You can see that information here in the graphic, red being the higher utilized areas and yellow being kind of the less frequent stops. Overall, we're seeing relatively lower numbers on this corridor, but good to have that data, knowing it's being utilized and trying to build that into our overall recommendations. We generally looked at vehicle crashes along the corridor to see where there were some hot spots. So you can kind of see that along the corridor, it is pretty frequent where those crashes could be happening. We didn't get into a full crash study on this, but it is part of one of our recommendations for the future that could be looked at. And I'll turn it back to Amy.
Okay. So as Dan mentioned, we started with a charrette last January over at Damon University, and had a good crowd that came together. We asked them, if they were residents, business owners, or property owners, and most of them were 2 or more of those. Also important to note, 80% of the folks, we asked them which intersection they live closest to, and many of them were from the area around Main and Harlem. We thought that was interesting to note. We asked how they use the corridor, and so I think with the conditions as they are today, 86% drive daily. Not very many folks did at that meeting came by bus, so we did do some additional outreach and talking with the folks from the transit agency to learn more about priorities on the corridor. 48% walked daily. There was some discussion about the weather when it comes to bikes, and that if we asked this question not in January, might have had some more different answers, but there were some folks who biked. And then importantly, we asked if there were better conditions for walking and biking, would people want to use those facilities, and 75% said yes. Also, just thinking about what's important about the future design of Main Street. We gave them a big long list of things to choose from, and safety, improving safety, reducing speeds, and having safe crossings were what came to the top of the list. Then we did an exercise where we gave everyone playing pieces and different components of street design: street trees, travel lanes, bike lanes, and in an ideal world, we like to say it's like an everything bagel. You could include everything you want to see, but we only have a limited right of way, so you had to make choices and decide what you want. And so we gave everyone street dimensions of what the right of way is, and we had them create their own ideal street section, and then we had one person from each table come up and present their ideas back to me. And on this slide, we've kind of summarized a lot of what the feedback was. And so kind of fitting it to 4 major themes, a lot of folks talking about safety and wanting to have safer conditions for pedestrians and cyclists. With walking and biking, wanting to have buffered facilities so that you're having some separation between the pedestrians and cyclists and moving cars. Lots of discussion of beautification, landscaping, street trees, and then some talk about improving transit along the corridor. We then followed that by having a couple of days of an on-site studio where we had additional stakeholder meetings and invited folks from the community to come in and talk further with us and share their ideas. From all that feedback, we did some draft designs, and then in March we had an online meeting where we reviewed a couple of cross sections that I'll share with you shortly, and got feedback from those. And all of that input informed the final report that you see, which includes a summary of all the work done, and then plus a draft concept plan laid out across the corridor. So talking about the design ideas, I started talking about the history of the corridor and how there's these different areas. And what we realized pretty quickly is that there's not going to be one solution that works along the entire corridor, but we've divided it into a few different areas. The mixed-use frontage areas, which are the darkest blue, and then the neighborhood frontage areas, which are the light blue. So the neighborhood frontage was where the buildings are set back a little further. There's front yards, and a little bit of a different feel than in the mixed-use area where buildings are up to the street, and you have those commercial uses. And then a third area, the university, is kind of a hybrid of those. And I'll get into that in a minute. But I'm going to walk through each section, starting with the mixed-use area. Again, the areas near Eggertsville and Snyder. And this is the cross-section. So looking at the top, that's the existing conditions, and then the below is the proposed. And the couple of big ideas, I don't know which one is best to point to, I guess over here. Looking at the right side of the road over here, adding a 10 to 15 foot shared use path, so a dedicated facility for pedestrians and cyclists that's buffered from the street with a planting area along the entire north side of the road. So that's the big intervention. Plus, you'll notice another difference from existing to proposed is, where possible, adding medians into the center of the street space. So what could that look like? Where places have done this, we looked as an example of the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, and you can see, this idea of having this space set aside for pedestrians and cyclists closer to where there's shop fronts, so you can actually dedicate space for pedestrians and cyclists. In other areas, they could, share that location, but it's just a way of having a dedicated facility, again, to make it safer for pedestrians and cyclists. So we wanted to look at what that could look like here. And so this is the area near Harlem Road. You see Harlem Road comes across the front here. This is the existing conditions. And then this is that what if image. So again, the big ideas this is showing is that shared use path along the north side of the road. You might have noticed when I click through, I'll go back one, we looked all along the corridor where there's opportunities to potentially get rid of dedicated turn lanes. So in the future condition, you could still turn right, but from the right turn lane, and it makes the crossing for pedestrians shorter. As well as looking at opportunities where we can add in landscape medians and keeping on-street parking, which is important in these commercial centers. We also thought about the long-term future. What if there's an opportunity for including dedicated transit lanes? This idea of keeping 2 lanes in each direction means that in the future, if this becomes a transit corridor, you could have dedicated transit lanes going in each direction. So looking at now the neighborhood frontage, this is the area just west of Damon University near Four Winds Way. And You can see, again, the conditions of, it's a little different. Buildings are set back. This is the existing conditions at the top and that proposed conditions at the bottom. The big differences here are looking at moving, still having 2 lanes in each direction, but having a dedicated median space in the middle for trees, and then still having that dedicated 12 to 15 foot shared use path on the north side of the road. So wanting to look at how that would look in overhead. This is the existing conditions. And then this is looking at that improvement. And so again, the idea here is that there's a lot of on-street parking in the neighborhood areas that is not used as much as it is in the mixed use areas. And so we can take that street space and repurpose it towards the median space and the shared use path. And again, there is that opportunity that in the future, should this become a transit corridor, we could then still have space to have transit lanes in each direction as well. There was a lot of discussion about landscape medians. The idea for beautification, there was a lot of support for that, but then also some concerns about maintenance. And so we had a lot of discussions about, well, how can we make that a little easier? So the ideas in the report are that there's not planted grass, but rather landscaping that would not require, that level of, mowing and maintenance. But the important thing is to have trees, which provide a visual cue to slow the speeds down, which again was one of the big ideas. So that's, you might notice in the drawings, the medians, they still include trees, but they were, just shown in, again, not having a grassy strip in the middle. The university frontage was one area where the land uses are very similar, where buildings are set back pretty far, but the parking, if you noticed in that parking slide that Sarah showed earlier, was pretty heavily utilized, especially during class times. And so we wanted to create a hybrid scenario where we still had 2 lanes in each direction, but then also had an on-street parking lane remaining. And so again, not having the median space in this part of the corridor. We also, in March, when we presented ideas, we showed ideas, what we call a road diet, where we take 2 of the travel lanes and reuse them for other things. So we still, in this scenario, you would have 1 vehicular lane in each direction, and then have a wider space for dedicated bike lanes in each direction, plus sidewalks, plus landscaping. So this is the illustration for the mixed use frontage, and then this one is the illustration for the neighborhood frontage. And so this was the ideas that we presented in March to the community, because we did want to get feedback. There's trade-offs with every design solution that you have to accept, and so you have to just make some decisions about what's most important. And so we wanted to get some feedback before we move forward. And so I'm going to actually ask Sarah to come up and walk us through some of the analysis that went into that.
So in order to evaluate if we could consider a road diet for this corridor, using all the traffic data I mentioned that we collected, we looked at multiple different considerations for the corridor, including level of service, delay, queue, travel run time, and carbon emissions. And so those are all factors that would help us, again, evaluate and present to the public the different options, the alternatives between a 5-lane section and a 3-lane road diet section. Based on traffic data that we collected, we did see that there was a peak volume of traffic from 7 to 5 every day. So it wasn't just an AM peak and a PM peak. It really was a high concentration of vehicular volume throughout the day. We also looked at level of service. So again, understanding the delay of a vehicle at a signalized intersection or unsignalized. We specifically looked at 10 signalized intersections along this corridor. And so keeping in mind level service A really being a priority for vehicles and not as great of an environment for pedestrians or cyclists, whereas where you get into an E or an F, it's a much slower experience. You might have to sit at a signal for 1 or 2 cycles as a motorist, but it is a much slower environment for pedestrians and cyclists to maneuver through. So we compared the existing conditions with a future 5-lane section and a future 3-lane section, and saw that in the 5-lane section, since it is comparable to today, we didn't really see a change in level of service. But in the 3-lane section, we did see that degradation of vehicular level of service keeping in mind that might be a better option for pedestrians and cyclists. We also calculated corridor travel time, so the length of time it would take for a vehicle to get from one end of the corridor to the other. We went in both directions, from Bailey to Kensington and back. And with that, saw that the increase in travel time that it would take to get from point A to point B doubled from the existing conditions to the future 3-lane section. We're seeing that the 5-lane section remains relatively the same, if not better. We also looked at carbon emissions. Again, that just really is another factor of looking at road diets and how many more vehicles are on the corridor for a longer period of time. And so we are seeing that the carbon emissions were increased in both conditions, a little bit more in the 3-lane. So to compare some of the advantages and disadvantages of a 5-lane section, the advantages of the 5-lane, I'll try to go through these quickly, but the shared use path, similar to the 3-lane, will provide space for pedestrians and cyclists. We're able to provide street trees still and shorten crossings. We're still able to provide on-street parking in the mixed-use areas. We do see some traffic delay and queue distance, but pretty negligible changes compared to existing. Again, the landscape medians are available to reduce vehicle conflicts and provide a better environment along the corridor. And it does support the future of having a dedicated transit lane by having the curb already the width enough for a 5-lane section to go down to the 3-lane with the bus. We're also seeing lower construction costs with the 3 lanes or than the 3-lane section, just based on what actually needs to be moved and the impacts of the corridor changing. Some disadvantages is that the pedestrians and cyclists are together in the same area. Bicyclists don't have their own dedicated facility. The landscape medians may restrict some driveway access for people unable to take lefts out of their homes or their businesses. And we did have to reduce on-street parking in neighborhood areas. For the 3-lane section, we're seeing a lot more benefits for the dedicated, separated pedestrian and bicyclist facilities, a lot more opportunity for street trees to really enhance the corridor and provide a better environment for people to live and work and to exist there. We are able to provide more on-street parking because of where we're able to pull in the travel lanes. There's more opportunity to bump out where we need parking. And then we are seeing that the landscape medians, again, will reduce conflicts and help with crash reduction. With that, we do have some disadvantages. As I mentioned, the travel time almost doubled during the PM peak hour, which will also increase transit travel time. With the level of service worsening, that could increase some vehicular delay and kind of frustration, and that the landscape medians may restrict driveway access similar to the 5-lane section. And then again, with the road diet, needing some finesse to make sure that we do have enough width for emergency vehicle response, snow storage, the things that would be required of any corridor, but it's specifically a DOT National Highway System corridor. So to compare those options, we didn't want to make a decision. We brought that to the public in the March meeting and presented the options. And we're seeing that in the darker blue shading, that half of the public really did favor that 5-lane section. We asked the question, would you prefer to have a dedicated pedestrian and bicyclist facility, but have an increased travel time to get from point A to point B? And again, 50% of the people did side with the 5-lane section, but we did see a lot of interest still in the 3-lane section in actually road dieting the corridor. With that, we made the decision as a stakeholder group and as a team to move forward with the 5-lane section. And so we took it to the next step of advancing the plans and actually laying out the entire corridor in CAD line work and really determining where the landscape medians would be, where the lane closures may be, all the improvements that kind of build into applying these different sections to each corridor. And so this is just a snapshot of what those plans look like. They are to scale and laid out based on aerial-based mapping. So that leads us to the question, how can these concepts be refined? We picked 3 general sections throughout the corridor. It's a 2.5-mile long corridor. So there are opportunities for making improvements in specific areas that can come in the future. And that can be done through eventually getting survey as part of the town and really looking at further existing conditions information. So opportunities like where there's existing mature street trees that we don't want to remove, there's opportunity you can see on the right side of the screen here for either narrowing the multi-use path We can get down to almost as low as 11 feet. Some areas we could even shrink down to 8 feet if needed. We could split the median around that tree to maintain and kind of protect it. There's other opportunity for, you'll see along the plan view where some areas where there's landscape medians that alternate into two-way left turn or dedicated left turns based on traffic needs and business access. So there's a lot of kind of modifications to the typical sections that were already presented. This is one example of an area that we specifically were concerned about, the Harlem Road, the Snyder area, where there is an increased interest in on-street parking, and our section only provides parking on one side of the street. So there's opportunity on the north, I'll go on the side, on the north, where we could cut into the landscape median and put parking in right up until the multi-use path. This isn't something we'd want to do throughout the corridor, but it is an option and a great way to, again, give that parking back, but still provide the multi-use path and the landscape and the trees. I'll also point out that this area is right in front of the fire department, and this was, again, where we can use public feedback and opportunities with the different stakeholders to modify our section. So this area, because of the fire department and their access, we did not include a landscape median, and we did maintain the two-way left turn lanes. Just one example of an opportunity to do that. So other things that we're still working on, or that were considered and are included in our report, include speed reduction. So we do recommend that the town pursue a speed limit study with New York State DOT to reduce the speed of the road, of the corridor. And again, that will have to be within constraints of what DOT allows for this corridor, but a speed study is definitely recommended. Also, suggestions for how to reduce signage as part of the overall design package, where parking should and should not go based on occupancy and knowledge of the area. Transit shelters, NFTA has a transit shelter program, so they've offered to provide transit shelters to specific areas as needed, so a definite recommendation for including that. Based on our cross-section, there is enough width in the landscape median on the side of the street to allow for a transit shelter and an area for the buses to pull right up. We also talked about maintenance a lot, specifically with adjusting the landscape medians and making sure that that's something that can be maintained by DOT and the DPW. And then further design refinements to come down the road once the project moves on to the next step, which again would include tree preservation, utility power lines that may or may not need to be relocated or buried underground, and then whatever's to come with the DOT 290 on and off ramp project, knowing that there's a future project there, and how does our multi-use path continue to connect down to this end of town based on that project. So our next steps and recommendations kind of with the town and with us as the consultant team would be for the town board to accept the study findings and then start to pursue funding opportunities. So in the executive summary, there's a whole list of federal, state, and local opportunities for getting funding for a project just like this. We also recommend further coordination with DOT and the local MPO to get on the tip or have an additional study like the speed study to be able to drive home this project and make sure that we can get everything we can out of it. And then from there, getting existing conditions survey done and beginning to do complete design. So with that, I don't know if you have anything else to add, Amy, or we can turn it over to the board for questions.
I was going to say, I think the board probably has some questions, and obviously this isn't our one and only opportunity for this. It's the first time we've had this presentation as a board. Looking at the presentation and at least having been knowledgeable about the process, I do have a couple of questions specific to some of the findings regarding the 3-lane versus 5-lane. The first, I'm not 100% certain how you arrived at some of the numbers, but if there was a model, does it show a shift in the 3-lane configuration? Does it show a shift in commuter volume to other routes? If it does, is there an increase in pedestrian and bicycle activity for local service? If so, shouldn't there be some carbon emission offsets to that?
to answer your last question first, I'm sure there will be, with that kind of shift in mode. We did not look at mode split and kind of mode share as a result of a road diet. We also worked with the MPO and with DOT to evaluate if there would be future diversion as a result of the road diet. And just based on the nature of this area and that corridor, there aren't opportunities for a lot of that east-west movement coming off of side residential streets. So we were not able to account for any diversion as part of the road diet. So the numbers, the volume in the 5-lane versus the 3-lane were the same volumes.
Other questions?
If I could just piggyback off the same one. So when you had the carbon emissions up there, it went significantly higher for the 3-lane. But then on the advantages and disadvantages, it listed it on both sides, and I kind of didn't understand. It said like lower as an advantage for the 3-lane, but also increases as a disadvantage. And I'd just like to understand a little bit better there.
Yeah, I kind of glossed over that because I think that was a typo in the presentation. So we'll modify that before it goes up online. But yes, it will increase. So I guess take what you want from that information. But yeah, we'll modify that. Thank you.
I have some questions. One thing that really surprised me, based on the fact that in front of Amherst High School and Damon College, both sides of the street never have an empty parking spot, how you could decide that we only need parking on one side of the street. Can you explain that?
Well, I'll start and I'll let Sarah add in. I think, that we were looking at, and let me pull up the cross sections. So, I think we're just looking at how we can make the best use of here's the university frontage, of the right-of-way space that we have. And so in this area, you're right, there is existing conditions, parking on both sides of the street. We found, I believe the study showed that on the university side, it was the most used. So that was the top priority to preserve that.
I live there. There's never a parking spot on either side of the street. On rare occasions, there are some. I think that's really problematic for both, for Damon College, Damon University now,
Okay, so
and the high school as well. I mean, I walk over there when I need to go because there's nowhere to park.
So I think if we may want to revisit some parking counts in that area during peak season. So it probably, if you caught it in December, meant that Damon wasn't in session. In which case the number from Amherst Central would have been spread across both sides of the street, as opposed to seeing a concentrated load from both schools at the same time. So that's just something that we need to look at or address in the
Sure,
fall.
and this could be an opportunity, as we were showing in that other area, where we might want to cut into the landscape area and have parking on both sides, and that's absolutely something we could look at doing, to modify this if the including parking on both sides is a top priority.
It is. I have another thing to point out. In what you showed, going west down Main Street to turn on to Bernhardt, that is not a turn lane.
No,
It's not.
Harlem that we showed the example where we removed the turn lane.
No. But you showed it in your diagram that it had enough space for a turn lane. A car does not fit in it as a turn lane.
it doesn't currently, but the road width would support a turn lane. I think is what
Okay.
they were trying to say.
I also am wondering, DOT just put in those bump outs, even though a lot of people said we didn't want them. How you think you could convince them to take out what they think is best practices because they just put them in?
So we did talk to DOT about the bump outs and got those plans from them. Because we would be eliminating parking in that section of the corridor, there would be no space for a bump out, so that would have to be removed as part of the project.
You're
And
removing parking where?
in the residential area, like near Smallwood, where where the bump outs are on the
They're
eastern
not
side of the
just there.
corridor.
They're at the corner of my street.
So
Barnhart
wherever
and Chateau.
where there's existing bump outs that we are proposing removing parking, the bump outs will go away as part of the project.
That parking can't go away either. I think there needs to be another look at some of these areas where it makes sense in some spots. But I'm just curious because DOT just put them in the last, yeah, that's what I was going to say, 10 years, and made a mess out of the timing of the lights over there too.
I think what I would say is if there was going to be a corridor wide project, right, all of that stuff would have to be evaluated so we could see. But I think that the parking reduction is an issue that some people have raised with me already, and so that's something that we'll have to reflect on over the next couple of months as we.
Well,
Next
and I
month or
guess
so.
I'm wondering your comment about the bump outs, since you had bump outs put in the village in
Sure.
Imagine
Imagine. So it wasn't Imagine. It was Picture Main Street.
Picture
So
Main
right, yeah. So in the Village of Williamsville, they shortened the crossing time. We also broke the signal sequence to slow down traffic and created what people see as backups. Right. So we did the exact opposite of what they're proposing in terms of timing issues. We intentionally slowed the timing of commuter volume through the village because we were pushing the pedestrian out ahead of the through volume of traffic that we had. So the idea was basically break the signal sequence, make cars go slower, crawl, stop at every intersection, give pedestrians a right of way, and shorten the crossing distance, which it did by about 16 feet. So there was
Okay.
a different parameter here than what's being described in this location. But the village is also a lot more in terms of density of business than what you see on this portion of Maine. So
And I will add that signal modifications will be necessary as part of the multi-use path being on the north side of the road, knowing that bicyclists will also be crossing the road and building that time into the current counts, just making sure that the signals are all set up appropriately to handle that multi-use path.
Okay. What input did you, one last question. What input did you get from the town's highway department about the islands or medians, whatever you want to call them?
So we did meet with the town Department of Public Works
We
and
don't
presented
have a
this to
Department
them.
of Public Works.
Well,
We have a highway
Excuse me,
department.
The highway department. I apologize. We met with the highway superintendent and the highway department and presented the findings to them. And that's where a lot of the back and forth with the landscape median came in, was how they would safely be able to maintain those islands. They requested a certain dimension that we were not able to meet. So we came back with the kind of hardscaped outer island with the low maintenance internal area so that a watering truck wouldn't need to be on there, or it would reduce the amount of actual workers that were on that island at a given time. And then we did get feedback on the types of trees and the space that would be available for those trees.
Okay.
okay, further questions? All right, I think what we'll do, so obviously there'll be some opportunity to continue to take public input. And as this presentation gets posted, I would expect that we'll have some. And then Dan will schedule some more feedback capacity before town board takes any actions here.
Yeah, just two things real quick, and I know we're running short. We were looking to have comments back on the report that's posted to the website within the next 2 to 3 weeks, just so we can establish a cutoff time for people to review the report, maybe watch the presentation, let us know what they think. Second of all, and I think this is kind of interesting, the conversation is certainly beneficial in this respect. We don't often get a chance to lean forward on these projects that involve New York State DOT highways. This is one opportunity that we had. We know that it's probably going to be 5 to 10 years before anything happens on Main Street, according to DOT's schedule for maintenance and or upgrades to their corridor. This really provided us with an opportunity to look ahead, to consider with the community without the pressure of a reconstruction project, what kinds of things along the corridor do we look at today and wonder, can be improved, can be enhanced in one way or the other. So this is a great opportunity for us. I think this information is going to be highly valuable. We will work closely with DOT as we finalize this report to make sure they understand what we found coming out of this report, the preferences of the community as identified to us. So we appreciate the opportunity. And subject to your questions, that'll end our briefing.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, we do have a second presentation this afternoon. Linda Ewell is our Director of Finance. Is going to come up, and for the town board today, you should have or are receiving the special districts budgets and first look at the capital improvements plan for the budget year. Before you delve into all of those, I thought it would be appropriate to ask Linda to just go through a little bit about bonds, bond anticipation notes, some debt issues. Also, today we have our bond counsel and financial advisor here that can answer board questions relative to that, relative to the presentation. I'm going to take the presentation and use the slides at the beginning of my CIP presentation in a couple of weeks as well. But I wanted to make sure that everybody was kind of looking at those items with this presentation in mind. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda Ewell.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I'm just going to give a brief presentation of our debt overview, how bonding works, what our bond authorization process is, what our borrowing process is, and then end up with our constitutional debt limit. Okay, so how bands and bonds work. So there are basically two kinds of borrowing that we do as a town. The first is a bond anticipation note. So this is a short-term financing, which is typically for a year. Sometimes it can be for less. And a project can be kept in a band for a maximum of 5 years. So you could borrow in the short term, you would reborrow each year for a maximum of 5 years, and at which time the project would have to be moved into a bond, which is the long-term debt. So bonds are the long-term financing. They typically are between 10 and 40 years. As a town, we tend to cap our length of borrowing at around 20 years, but there are projects that you can borrow for up to 30 or 40 years for, although in the market you don't typically see a 40-year borrowing. The maximum term of the financing is determined by the period of probable usefulness, or the PPU is what we refer to it as. And once the project is rolled from a band into a bond, then the principal and interest payments are set for the term of the bond. There are opportunities to refinance a bond under certain circumstances down the road if interest rates should decline and it is favorable for the town to do so. And the maximum time period that we can finance a project for, the PPU, is determined by New York State finance law. So for an example, police vehicles we can borrow for a term of 3 years. Passenger vehicles are up to 5 years. Construction equipment is between 5 and 15 years, depending on the cost of the equipment. Streets are typically 15 years. Buildings can be 10 to 25 years, depending on the construction of the building. And then water and sewer is up to 40 years. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our bond authorization process. So each year, as you know, the town establishes its capital improvement plan, or the CIP, in conjunction with the budget process. After that is approved, when a department is ready to move forward with an approved project, they prepare a MAP plan and report, or an MPR, and that is submitted to myself for review. Once I have reviewed it, I will then pass that along to the legal department, and they will process it. From there, the legal department coordinates with bond counsel who provides a bond resolution for placement on the town board agenda. And from there, depending on the type of project, one of several different processes can be followed depending on the project. So if it is a project that has a PPU of 5 years or less, that bond becomes effective immediately upon approval by the town board. And if the project is within a special district, then we are required to hold a public hearing. So we call for a public hearing, hold the public hearing. Typically after that, the bond authorization will be approved, and the bond is then effective. If the project has a PPU of over 5 years and it is not in a special district, this is when, after approval by the town board, a 30-day permissive referendum period goes into effect. And once that 30-day period is expired, then the bond is authorized. And all bonds must be approved by a supermajority of the board, which is 2/3 of the board's voting strength, or would require 4-member approval of a 5-member board, such as our town board. Now I'll discuss the borrowing process. So we typically issue debt on an annual basis in a single borrowing in the fall. There are times where we may have a larger project that has been approved that we would need to issue a shorter term borrowing in the spring to finance that project. And then recently we have rolled that into our regular fall borrowing. So in that case, the bond anticipation note would be for a term shorter than 1 year. The comptroller's office then works with our municipal advisor, capital market advisors, and bond counsel, which is Harris Beach, on finalizing the town's official statement, which outlines our borrowing. We receive a credit rating for our issuance from Moody's Investor Services, and our 2023 bond rating was AA3 positive. And we were given a positive outlook in 2023, which was an upgrade from 2022, and that is considered a high grade rating. So the bonding is then put out to market by the municipal advisors. We close on the borrowing typically in November, and projects with a 5-year PPU are typically kept in a short-term financing. So we will roll those for the maximum amount of time. Up to the 5 years. Projects that have a longer PPU are initially issued as short-term debt or a bond anticipation note, and then we will roll them typically 2 years down the road into a serial bond, which is the longer term borrowing. Projects can be held for shorter or longer periods depending on what the projected interest rates are. And typically infrastructure projects such as road, water, sewer, they may be bonded in year 1 because we know those are set numbers that we're going to borrow. But again, if interest rates are high, we may put those in a bond anticipation note until we feel it's beneficial to put them into a serial bond. We have a constitutional debt limit. The town has the power to contract indebtedness for any town purpose. The principal amount of the debt cannot exceed 7% of the most recent 5-year average full valuation of taxable real estate of the town. And this is also subject to certain exclusions and deductions such as water and certain certain sewer facilities. So our constitutional debt limit as of December 31st, 2023 was approximately 19%. We do have some exclusions for water. And our estimated constitutional debt limit at December 31st of 2024 is anticipated to be 17.3%. And this takes into account, you know, what we're going to bond this year, any pay downs that are calculated by the comptroller's office, and our current assessed value. So we do have Jeff Storch, who is our bond counsel with Harris Beach here tonight, and also Rick Gansey, who is our municipal advisor with Capital Markets Advisors, as well as Daryl Bramer, our comptroller, and myself to answer any questions that you may have.
So 2 things I just want to point out. So in the past, the predating my term. I don't know when the practice started, but the town started bonding for most of its vehicle purchases. We've been able to now pull back, and going into 24, we'll have pulled back most of the small vehicle purchases, including police, smaller highway equipment, up to 350s, which is used by rec for plowing and different services. We'll have pulled those back into the budget. Those are traditionally 5-year PPUs, and although 350s can be extended further than that, they seem to be more reoccurring. So the building department, the police department, those with the smaller passenger vehicles, those have been pulled pretty much into the budget, and what we're left bonding are larger equipment purchases. Steve will have, or Highway will have, I think a plow and a high lift or something along those lines. And this year's, I think the sewer treatment plant has a sludge hauler in this year. So there are some larger, unique vehicles that are still in the capital plan. And well, the last thing I'll say is one of the things we've heard from Moody's is, we have to really watch what we show in terms of future indebtedness. So I think we've done a pretty good job of really kind of pulling in some of those out year numbers. And my hope is that we're going to be in a good position this year to see if we can increase our credit rating from the AA3 positive outlook, but that'll remain to be seen. Probably, and Rick could attest to that. A lot of that's going to be what the market looks like, and then what happens with pensions. So, which plays into that. So, so I did want to kind of open it to the board for questions. And this is a process that I've become a little bit more accustomed to and deal with a little bit more firsthand than the rest of you. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to set this opportunity. Go ahead.
I just want to compliment Linda on how simple you made the explanation. It's understandable to people in general. I've asked a lot of questions over the years, but it's really nice to have it all laid out because I forget what the different acronyms stand for. And I'm constantly saying, what's the difference or which is which? And you did a really nice job. So thank you.
If I may, perhaps not a question for you, Linda, but for our consultants. I'm aware of the answer, but I want it on the record from you guys. I don't believe that the town's debt is out of line for our situation, our size, our assessed value. Do you believe that our town debt is in line with other municipalities in a similar situation?
The most direct comp would be your peers in Erie County. The peers in Erie County, which would be, direct peer would be Tonawanda, obviously. Your debt is pretty much, right in line with the town of Tonawanda, both on a constitutional debt limit usage, as well as some of the other statistics, which would be full value, debt per full value and debt per capita. So pretty comparable to those. When you get into comparisons with, your budget size to others in the state, the comparison really is a little bit off because you're comparing yourselves to much larger full valuations in Suffolk and Westchester and Rockland County. So some of the statistics with respect to, debt as a percentage of full value don't appear as good because those tax bases are, multiples of where you are in the town of Amherst, just given their geographic location and property values.
Okay.
I still like that answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sean?
Yeah. So I have a question for Jeff. Most of all the bonds that we do in the town are federally tax exempt, correct? Which ones are not? Can you do it in the?
So as far as the last, we have one. How old is that one? Because it's probably pretty old. I'll explain the difference this way.
Okay.
The only taxable bond we currently have outstanding is for the ice facility because we rent out space for businesses in there.
Because it makes a profit.
Yeah, so it's not just a profit, it's the use which sets it. So as a government, you can't basically give a private citizen use of your facility, have them take advantage of tax exempt bonds, right? So you would have to give everybody the same sort of opportunity. So the federal government allows us, if we remove that tax exempt, you can use it. It still has to be a town purpose, but you can get involved with a private entity. A perfect example is we're doing one in Rochester, a sewer pipe that goes right to a factory that's not anybody else's. It's not going to be tax exempt because it's just one factory using the sewer pipe, but it's still a government purpose. So every project that you guys send us, and we look at to see what the use is and who's using for facilities to see if it meets the tax exempt test, which is. It could be, there are different ones. It's the area of the building, it's whether they make money, it's all these different kind of factors.
That would extend if the primary secondary user after the town is not-for-profit organization?
The not-for-profit doesn't matter. It's still considered a private user.
So in the case of senior center, there are some not-for-profit organizations that will use the facility, but they're occupying a limited amount of space and time.
So there's a calculation that we look at the actual area of the building and how much they use, and it's per time and per size of the building. Okay. As long as they're not going over that, then we're comfortable saying it's tax exempt.
So when you take a bond out, you have to issue certain disclosures. Is that fair?
Yes.
What disclosures do you have to?
So you're going to, in this official statement that Linda talked about, that contains all your financial statements, demographics, and some basic laws of how bonds work. You are required every year to update your financial statements. That are usually the audit financial statements are attached to the official statement, and then the demographic stuff is required. Then there's an additional, what we call them like 10 or 11 material event notices, and those are big time things that an investor would like to know if it happened. For example, if you defaulted, if your rating went down, if you have a giant tax case against the town, material litigation. Unfortunately, material is not a real term. It's determined by what you think material is, right? But you are required on an ongoing basis to keep those, keep the market aware of those things that are happening. For the most part, most things are not material, and we don't, you just annually do this, but occasionally we get one. The rating is usually the biggest.
Yeah, and we would also point out that official statement is a public document. So there's a website called the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board EMMA portal, EMMA, and you could find continuing disclosure and disclosure documents of any municipality in the country simply by looking up, the town of Amherst, and it'll pop up the most recent disclosure that the town used for the borrower.
So annually, Rick's shop pops up your annual audited financial statements every year. It's required to by a certain date. And then anybody who's investing can go on and figure it out.
One of the questions I guess I might have, Rick, in talking about our peers downstate and dealing with some of the comparisons, even in Erie County, is it important to your credit rating to maintain your valuation, or do they use so in other words, we're full valuation this year because we've just completed our reval project. Is that something that affects, or does it have any impact on your credit rating or your I guess it would impact your debt limit certainly, but
Yeah, I think there's like 4 criteria really. It's management, obviously, of the town, like economy and demographics, debt statistics, and obviously tax base. So the things that you could directly control, obviously, are the debt and obviously the management. But there's certain things in the economy and demographics that are more tougher to control as a town board. But when you look at like your tax base really upstate New York, I would think that Amherst, obviously outside of the big four cities, is likely the largest, full valuation upstate, if you will, if you don't count, Rockland and Suffolk and Westchester and, those some larger towns downstate. But when you look at some of the large towns on the island, you have a similar budget size as some towns that have multiples of full valuation, and that's just sort of how the property values work in some parts of New York. But I mean, I think certainly the credit, from a credit perspective, in the discussions that we've had with Moody's over the years, is your tax base is extremely strong. Obviously, you have the large university presence, which obviously doesn't get included in the tax base, but I think having that university presence is important as the economic sort of center of that world. So that goes into, obviously, fund balance is critically important as well. Fund balance, full valuation, debt margin are the three most critical pieces that they look at from an analytical standpoint. But certainly good, strong credit rating, AA3 positive outlook. Obviously, the goal is to get that to increase over the next couple of years. It's much harder to get it increased than it is to get downgraded. But I think the town's in a good position, and certainly credit rating is strong compared to some peers here and certainly Erie County.
Other questions? Oh, any questions for Linda or Daryl while they're here? Everybody can take a look at the CIP over the next couple of weeks and generate some questions, and we'll be in full bore conversation with that. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming in. Linda, thank you for the presentation. We're going to move on with our town board meeting agenda items then. No public hearings this evening, somehow. So whether it's by accident or not, I'm not sure. We do have we do have some items though, and so for consideration of a consent agenda, I'm going to go through the resolutions. First resolution 739, Councilmember Zuccalla, you have appointments to the Amherst Recycling and Waste Committee. Yes, I do. Any questions about those appointments? Any reason to withhold them from consent? Resolution 740 is a permission to file applications for zoning and environmental permitting for 1265 Smith Road. Any questions regarding the permission to file zoning and environmental permit requests? Any reason not to include that in consent? Resolution 741 is consulting agreement with Nora Robshaw Esquire, CRS 5054. For anybody who doesn't know, Nora will be leaving our attorney's office, returning to the private sector. Any questions regarding maintaining a consultancy agreement? Any reason to withhold that from consent? Resolution 742 is amusement license for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Amherst. I recommend we grant that license. Any reason not to do that via consent? Resolution 743 is a new firefighter for East Amherst Fire Company. Any questions about the appointment or any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 744 is a new firefighter for the Swarmville Fire Company. Any questions about that appointment? Any reason to withhold that from consent? And Resolution 745 is a new firefighter for the Gettsville Fire Company. Any questions about the appointment? Any reason to withhold it from consent?
I just want to say it's nice. We've been adding firefighters at a number of the fire departments over the last few months.
It is good. We need a lot more.
I know we need more, but I want to at least
No, yes, we're
celebrate that
grateful.
we're getting some.
Yes. Resolution 746 is Toshiba KIP plotter. Any questions regarding the plotter? Any reason to withhold that from consent? Resolution 747 is an award of bid for Senior Center Cafe renovation. Award of bid for Hayes Construction Services. General contract for Senior Center Cafe renovation Capital Improvements, Town of Amherst, project number 2023 F-17.1. Any questions regarding the award of bid? Any reason to withhold it from consent? For anybody who doesn't know, we're moving the cafe. We have a makeshift cafe near our kitchen. We're putting a new cafe combined with a gift shop at the front of the senior center, at the very front when you first come in. We think that'll benefit people on campus using the senior center and library. Resolution 748, it's the budget transfers and amendments. Any questions regarding those? Any reason to withhold them from consent? Resolution 749 is an award of bid 2024036, Townwide Tires, Tubes and Services, CRS 5051. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 750 is an award of bid 2024037 for a golf range utility vehicle and equipment and accessories, CRS 5053. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 751 is a Street culvert replacement over ditch 10, Bridge New York local project agreement to rescind and replace resolution 2023-892, CRS 4376, PIN 5765.04, Town of Amherst, job number 2021.014, CRS 5055. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 752 is an award of bid for the Evergreen Terrace street lighting, concrete Applied Technologies Corporation, DBA Catco, Town of Amherst, job number 2016.054A. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 753 is an award of bid on the installation of rectangular rapid flashing beacons, RRFB, at Smith Road, Paradise Road, and Youngs Road Concrete Applied Technologies Corporation, DBA, Catco, Town of Amherst, job number 2020.021. Any questions regarding that install of the rapid beacons award? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 754 is a change order number 1 for EC Industrial Power and Lighting Corporation for Royal Park Sports Complex, Town of Amherst, job 2019.055, CRS 5058. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 755 is to authorize the purchase of one John Deere HD flail mower with attachments, CRS 5047. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 756 is a school guard, part-time, 3 positions for the police department. Any questions regarding the appointments? Any reason to withhold them from consent? Resolution 757 is assistant code enforcement officer for the building department. Any questions regarding the appointment? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 758 is a request to use additional trust and agency funds, account T4011. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 759 is set a first public hearing for fiscal year 2025, 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plan for the community development program. Any questions regarding the resolution and setting the public hearing? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 760 is to authorize the supervisor to sign the HUD 2024 Home Investment Partnership Program contract, Home CRS 5064. Any questions regarding the authorization? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 761 is to authorize the supervisor to sign the HUD 2024 Community Development Block Grant Contract, CDBG, CRS 5063. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 762 is a training and travel request for Gun-Involved Violence Elimination, or GIVE Symposium. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 763 is approval to use trust and agency funds for senior services. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent?
I would like it held from consent.
Okay.
I intend to abstain. This is not a contract with County Senior Services, but University Express is a program that we offer. The funds in this resolution will go directly to presenters from senior services or from the senior center to the presenters, but because it's a county program, I intend to abstain.
Okay, Resolution 764 is an approval to use trust and agency funds as well. This one is a donation from the Amherst Generations Foundation. Is there any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold this from consent? Resolution 765 is a travel request for required operator training courses. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 766 is the USGS Joint Funding Agreement for Water Resource Investigations, fiscal year 2024 to 2025, CRS 5057. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Resolution 767 is an authorization to pay vendor. Any questions regarding the resolution? Any reason to withhold that authorization from consent? Resolution 768 is a service agreement with DFC grant. Any questions regarding the service agreement? Any reason to withhold it from consent? Communication 77 is correspondence from Sean Hopkins Esquire regarding a project at 4300 Millersport Highway.
Highway
Yeah,
engineering
I know. Thank you.
attorney.
Right, so, right, yeah, I'd like to move forward with a resolution, or set a public hearing for the lighting, for creating the lighting district.
Yeah.
Any reason not to do that?
Right, but it should get referred to the departments I mentioned.
So, yeah, so I would say that we would refer it to planning, engineering, highway,
An attorney.
attorney, and finance, and then
Oh, I didn't think of finance.
and then create or then
Schedule the,
schedule a public hearing. Any reason not to do that via consent?
I don't remember if there was a date in the letter.
Sean, is Sean here? He's
Yeah.
there. What do we have?
Was there a date in the letter?
Your request to,
Okay,
so we have budget public hearings in October. I would say that the last of the 3 October meetings would probably be the date I'd be looking to schedule for, Sean. Is that all right? 28th? So any reason not to set it for October 28th? Communication 78 is correspondence from Sean Hopkins Esquire for 455 and 495 Shellis Road regarding suburban agricultural zoning report. This one I'm going to refer to the town attorney and town planning department, and ultimately you're seeking board action on a document. So I don't know what the exact process internally for that is. Dan, do you want to forward here?
Sure. The process that we've been following here is to talk with the planning board, see what the planning board thought about the report and any recommendations that they might have in terms of its implementation. They did meet in August. However, there were only 4 of the 7 members there. They asked that they be permitted to have a conversation at another planning board meeting to follow. That might be this Thursday. At that point, we'll summarize both sessions with them, provide you with those insights, and we can provide you with a couple of courses of action for the report itself. The one thing we would prefer not to do is to select parcels and start changing the designations of the report until we have a good sense of what we want to do with it.
And we do have a correspondence in front of us that we're seeking to take action on. I think we could refer to the planning board chair.
We can, well, again, I think it depends on what the town board wants to do with that report and what kind of standing it has with you in terms of supporting your decisions.
Again, so my feeling is that, right, there's a report, it's in planning board's hands for review. There's a question regarding parcels. The planning board is undertaking a review of that report. My feeling is that we should refer this request to the planning department, the planning board chairperson, and the town attorney.
We really usually refer to the planning board, not just the chair.
Okay, fine, the planning board.
So we would probably, we'll see if we can discuss that on Thursday. The next time we would actually be in a position to really talk about it with information would be the October meeting.
I'm just referring it to them
Got
for
it.
review. So
Yep.
they're referring the correspondence to the planning board. So I would say, I would like to do that. Is there any reason not to do that via consent?
I'm okay with that, but I would like to, again, renew my objection to a parcel by parcel review of the essay report. I think if we're going to accept it or use it as a guiding document, we should use it as is. And I defer to the planning board and planning department, but I think it's important that we don't open this up for a bunch of people to submit their own edits prior to acceptance for a document that the town has paid for.
I
That's
guess
just my objection. Want it noted.
my feeling is that if a property owner is going to submit a letter from an attorney to us regarding something in that document, and we know that the planning board's in review of that document, we, as a supervisor, I feel like we're beholden to refer that to that same board.
I agree, and I have no objection to looking at parcels as they come through, but I don't want to, my personal objection is to the document that was created by the consultants. I'd like to kind of leave as is, in my personal view, and then we can look at the parcels, of course, we can always make changes and amendments and rezoning as necessary, but I think it's important that we don't alter what we already asked consultants to look at and pay for.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't just consultants that worked on it, just so it's
The
clear.
report that came to us for.
Okay.
So again, we're referring it to planning board. Any
Thank you.
issues with that? Okay.
Yep.
Planning department, town attorney, and planning board. Communication 79 is a notice of claim from Lynn M. Logan and Gerard Logan and her spouse versus the town of Amherst et al. Recommend we receive this, refer to the town attorney. Any reason not to do that via consent? Resolution 769 is a private improvement permit number 3126 for sanitary sewer for the Amherst Commerce Center 2023.011 SP 2023-03. I will recommend we accept that public improvement permit or grant that public improvement permit. Is there any reason not to do that via consent? Resolution 770 is a public improvement permit number 3127 for storm system, Amherst Commerce Center, 2023.011 / SP 2023-03. I would recommend we grant that public improvement permit as well. Is there any reason not to do that via consent? As I mentioned earlier, we do have two items to adjourn to an executive session this evening. The first is a potential land donation. The second is CSEA negotiations. I'm going to motion to adjourn to executive session at this time. Second. All in favor?